The story begins as we see a masked man confronted by a swarm of monsters. He takes them out in an instant, but he says it's not enough, and he still wants more. We cut to a man in a carriage, running away from goblins, but luckily for him, a group of warriors appear, and they are able to deal with the goblins. After their victory, they return to the town, passing by a hungry Fate, who is standing guard at the castle. He notices them, but is disappointed he can never be like them, because he is constantly hungry because of his useless skill, gluttony. The crowd is amazed as a group of holy knights pass through the town. They are the trio of the Vlerick siblings, but we see they are terrible people as one of them kicks away a peasant in their way. They make their way towards the castle, and at the gate, the eldest Raphael gives Fate his pay by throwing it on the ground. As he tries to pick it up, Hato steps on his hand, but his stomach growls at that moment, and Raphael calls him disgusting. The siblings get mad at the growling, thinking it makes it seem like they don't pay him enough. They start beating him up, but he is saved by another holy knight named Roxy, who reminds the siblings of their duty as holy knights to be kind to the citizens they have sworn to protect. The siblings decide to leave, and Roxy helps Fate up. She consoles him by telling him that guarding the gate is honorable, and they are both equal in their job. Roxy takes over guarding the gate, and asks him to tell her if something like this happens again, but Fate says that he is used to it, and he decides to leave. We learn that Fate wants to protect Roxy by keeping a distance, and he doesn't want to get her involved as he fears that Raphael will hurt her too. Fate is encouraged by the bartender to stand up for himself, or he could end up dead like the last guy. On his way home, Fate curses his gluttony skill for still being hungry even though he had a meal. He wishes he could have been born with a more useful skill, and despairs that he can't do anything else, because he can't change how things are. Fate notices thieves jumping over the castle wall, so he hurries over to Roxy to tell her the situation, and she leaves him to take over her position as she runs off to find the thieves. As he waits for Roxy to finish beating up the thieves, one of them runs toward him. His instincts tell him to run, but the thought of Roxy trusting him with her position helps him muster the courage to stay. He prepares himself to fight, and notices that the thief is already injured. He gathers his courage and jumps toward the man, piercing him through his chest, and he suddenly hears a voice telling him that his gluttony skill has been activated, and his stats have been increased. Fate is confused, and the voice further tells him that the skills Identify and Telepathy have been added for him. At the same time, Roxy returns from her fight and is concerned for him, but he notices something strange, because he heard words coming from her, but her mouth didn't move. He reassures her and tells her that she can take credit for his kill, because it would cause problems for him if Raphael found out, so in return, Roxy offers him a job to work for her family. Fate considers his options, and eventually agrees to work for her family. Later that night, Fate notices that all his stats are in the triple digits, and he then realizes that he must have been using telepathy on Roxy earlier. He is still confused about what is going on, but is now confident he can defeat monsters with his improved stats. The following day, Fate goes out to look for a sword. But when the merchant finds out he is poor, he tells him he can only afford the trash swords in the barrel. He looks through the swords using his new Identify skill, and learns that all the swords are useless except one. When Fate examines that sword, he is shocked when it suddenly speaks to him, introducing itself as Greed, and telling Fate to buy him. Upon learning that Greed is knowledgeable about gluttony, he ends up deciding to buy it. We see the Vlerick siblings talk about Roxy trying to hire Fate without informing them first, but Raphael feels there is no need to complicate things between them and the Hartz family, because they are both part of the 5 great families that support the kingdom, while noting Fate as being worthless. Raphael heads toward the military district, while his sister wonders what he's going to study, so he tells her his plan to learn how to become immortal. Later on, we see Fate walking with Greed in his hand, and it warns him of something fast approaching. A goblin appears out of nowhere, but Fate is easily able to kill it, which activates his gluttony skill, increasing his stats once again, and the skill strength boost is given to him. Swarms of goblins appear out of nowhere, but Fate remains calm as he cuts them down. After each kill, his gluttony skill is activated, and he ends up killing hundreds. When it's all over, he checks his stats, and is surprised by how much they have increased. Greed points out that Fate must be full, and Fate notices that his stomach hasn't growled at all that day, which has never happened before. Greed says that normally each person has only the skill they are born with, but thanks to gluttony, fate can steal the stats and skills of others, but it's not something that other people can know about. Fate realizes that he must always fight alone, but greed reassures him, saying he is not alone since he is with him. Fate takes all the goblin to get paid, and wonders about all the things he can buy as they enter the town, but is reminded by greed of his maintenance coming first. At that moment, they suddenly run into a man and a young girl who we see asking for help. Fate uses his skill Identify to assess the man's threat level and finds that he has the skill to hide stats. Fate is suspicious, but says that they can't just ignore a girl's cry for help. They follow the man, and he tells the girl that she'll be sold as a slave to the Holy Knights. Greed warns Fate that the man is tough, so it's his last chance to run away, but Fate says he has finally gained the power he always wanted, and he will use it to protect the weak. We see an old nun speaking to a bunch of orphans, telling them about Holy Laplace, the creator of the world. She reveals that when Laplace left the world, she gifted people special powers known as skills, telling them about the time when there were no skills, and everything was peaceful. A nun barges into the room, saying she can't find a missing orphan. She leaves to continue her search, and the other nun wonders where the girl named Sahara has gone. We learn that the girl who has been kidnapped is Sahara, and as the kidnapper leaves, Fate takes this chance to save her. He rescues the girl, but the kidnapper appears behind him. The kidnapper calls him foolish, telling him that he has no chance of beating him. He wants to take the girl to safety, but is unsure of what to do. Greed advises him to step back, take advantage of the kidnapper's overconfidence, and wait for the right moment to attack. He tries to flee with Sahara, but they eventually reach a dead end. Fate launches a surprise attack, and as the man prepares to use his skill, Greed instructs Fate to strike him head-on. Fate charges at the man, delivering a decisive blow. Fate orders the man to tell him everything, but he refuses, so Fate proceeds to torture him, and he eventually tells Fate that he was ordered by Hato to kidnap Sahara. Fate takes Sahara to get some food after hearing her stomach growl, and he takes her back to the orphanage. He is surprised to hear Sahara's gratitude, because it's the first time someone thanked him. He approaches Sahara and gives her advice, the same words his father had told him in the past, but he had been unable to understand them up until now. No matter how hard things get, if you can laugh them off, one day you will find happiness. On the way back, Greed congratulates Fate on learning his first technical skill, the one-handed sword technique. A secret technique that allows him to attack twice in a single strike. Fate thinks he got lucky against the kidnapper, and he is determined to get stronger, so that he can win without relying on luck. The following day, Fate arrives at the Hart family estate, where Roxy greets him at the gate, and he is taken aback by her appearance. She takes him to the grave of her recently deceased father, revealing that he was killed 5 days ago in Gallia. Gallia is a continent dominated by monsters, and it's the duty of Holy Knights to keep them in check. Roxy explains that this duty fell to the Hart family this year, but unfortunately, a divine dragon came out of a 1,000-year solitude, wiping out the group led by her father. She tells him that she is currently the head of the house, and she is looking forward to working with him. As they are about to shake hands, Fate remembers that his telepathy will be activated, so he points towards a random person. We meet the chief mate Haru, who reminds Fate to conduct himself as a servant of the Hart family. A week goes by, as Fate continues to work in the Hart estate. He's talking with the other servants, when his stomach starts to growl, shocking the other servants, because they just ate lunch. He is called to meet Roxy, but his stomach continues to growl, and even Fate is confused by what is happening. Roxy tries to have a conversation with him, but he keeps thinking about why he's so hungry. Roxy snaps him out of it, and the two relate over their dead fathers, because they were both killed by monsters. She considers him as a member of the family, causing him to become flustered, but he suddenly loses consciousness. He wakes up in his room, where he sees a note from Roxy, telling him to take the day off. Fate questions Greed about his hunger, and Greed reveals that it is due to gluttony. The more souls Fate consumes, the stronger he'll become, but at the same time, his desire will also grow stronger, and he is destined to seek out souls to consume until the day that he dies. Greed tells Fate that when his hunger is at its limit, it will show in his eyes, and he realizes that his eyes are red. Fate goes outside and walks by a group of people, thinking they smell delicious, as Greed explains that his hunger boost has kicked in because his hunger is at its limit. Greed explains that it's a temporary power that helps him hunt prey, and the prey can be tracked by scent, saying weaker prey will be paralyzed by fear. We see them go outside the kingdom and find several goblins terrified. Fate massacres all of them and heads towards the hobgoblin forest. He continues to kill for several hours until his hunger is finally satisfied, but a goblin king appears out of nowhere and he uses his identify skill. We see that they're both almost equal in terms of stats, but the goblin king has a health regeneration skill. Fate goes after the goblin king and is disgusted to see the goblin devour a human. He launches a surprise attack, slicing off its arm, and the fight goes on, but all he can do is dodge its attacks. Greed tells him to attack, so he charges in, managing to overpower it, and he lands the finishing blow. Fate's stats increase significantly, and he gains the health regeneration skill. Greed reveals that with Fate's current stats, he can unlock Greed's first level in exchange for his stats. Greed explains that the first level will give him new functions, but Fate is shocked to learn that he needs to hand over all the stats he gained since they met. Greed reveals that Fate will lose the right to wield him if he doesn't unlock him, so Fate agrees to do it. He begins the process, and Fate can feel his power leaving his body as Greed transforms into a magic bow. He tells Fate that there is a goblin watching them, and he teaches Fate how to use the bow, which creates magic arrows when the string is pulled, telling him that he can aim wherever he wants, but the arrow will always hit its target. Fate takes the Goblin King's ears, and he leaves it at the orphanage door, as he believes that they need it more. The next day, Fate stops an intruder, but turns out it's Roxy dressed up as a peasant, trying to secretly go to town for inspection. She brings Fate along with her, and on the way to town, she asks Fate to show her his sword, but he's afraid that she might figure something out after she sees it. The sword slips from his hand, and Roxy catches it, but fortunately doesn't notice anything. She tells Fate that the sword needs some maintenance, saying she will take him to the Hart family's blacksmith. They finally reach the town and are standing at a stall when everyone tenses up as a holy knight approaches. Fate's stomach growls at the worst possible time, angering the holy knight. The knight tries to step on him, but Roxy stops him, catching everyone's attention. Everyone is looking at Roxy, trying to figure out if the peasant girl is actually Miss Roxy. Greed tells Fate that if they act as a couple, no one will think that the peasant girl is actually Roxy. Roxy overhears this plan when Fate replies to Greed, thinking it's a good idea, so she goes along with it, and they start acting like a couple, convincing everyone that the girl is not Roxy. While everyone is distracted, they both slip away, and they hide in the corner. Fate hears her thoughts, as she thinks about how her heart is racing, because this is the first time she has locked arms with a boy. Roxy decides that they need to keep moving, and they overhear people talking about all the dead goblins that were recently found. The rumors are that it was done by a wandering monster, but it doesn't explain why the goblin ears were donated to the orphanage in the slums. She asks Fate to take her where the warriors gather, saying she wants to investigate the wandering monster. Fate takes Roxy to the bar, where the bartender reveals that he has heard about a warrior who struck gold when he found a mountain of goblin corpses with their ears still intact. Roxy believes that it must have been a monster from a different region, and the bartender thinks this is bad for business because a lot of merchants travel through those goblin plains, so people won't travel because they fear that a monster might attack them. An old man enters the bar, and he joins the conversation, telling them the monster is a lich, which is why the holy knights are directly dealing with him. A group of warriors enter the bar and tell Roxy to join them for fun. Roxy pushes the man lightly, but he is sent crashing to the other side of the room, and they realize that only a holy knight can have that much power. Roxy finally reveals her identity, and the warriors apologize, trying to give her all the money they have. But she rejects it, telling them not to fear the holy knights, as she reveals that she dreams of a world where commoners and holy knights can laugh together. They go to the blacksmith, who finishes maintenance on Greed, so he now looks like a new sword. While going through town, Roxy explains that she didn't know about the hunt because it's being led by the Vlarik family, and they simply didn't tell her. We see Hato holding a child, explaining that he is simply taking a lost child into protection, but Fate takes the boy away, and Roxy tells them that they will take care of him. Roxy asks Raphael why she was not informed about the hunt, and he says that he didn't want to bother her, as she must have been busy mourning her father, The Vleriks decide to leave, while Fate and Roxy take the boy to find his mother, allowing him to reunite with her. After returning home, Fate asks Greed for a way to hunt monsters without Roxy finding out, and the next day, Greed tells him to buy a mask with perception warping magic, which will make him look different to whoever sees him. We see that Raphael has gathered the knights in a dark room, and they discuss the excursion to Gallia. Sometime later, a group of warriors find more dead goblins, and they look up to find a lich standing on a mountain of corpses. The terrified warriors call it a corpse, and they run away, as we see Fate enjoy the nickname given to him. The next day, Roxy goes up to Fate and tells him to go with her, because she has a secret mission for him. They both get in a carriage and pass through the Hart family's vineyard to a higher quality, but Greed tells him he must bear the pain no matter what, or else he will lose control, and it will be even worse than his starvation state. Fate tries, but Roxy tells him that she has already decided that she will go. Meanwhile, we see that the Vleriks are celebrating, because they are about to leave for a place called Tenburn. Hado asks Raphael to tell him the secret involving immortality, but Raphael just tells him that he must successfully deal with the Lich. We see Fate standing in the middle of the plains, thinking about how he can't interfere with official matters, but he decides that he can't let the Holy Knights continue to treat people like trash. Hado arrives with his men and orders them to attack Fate, but he easily deals with them as Hado watches on in horror. The others run away in fear, and Hado prepares to take him on, saying he won't let Corpse make a fool of him. Fate removes his mask, revealing his identity, and Hado wonders how a nobody like him can be so powerful. Hado takes pride in his status as a holy knight, but Fate challenges him to display his powers. Fate asks Greed if he can shatter a holy sword, and Greed says that it shouldn't be a problem, telling Fate to swing as hard as he can. Hado tries to attack with holy light, but Fate suddenly appears behind him. He takes a swing, but Fate destroys the holy sword, and he challenges Hado to take the broken half. Hado tries to step back, but he falls to the ground, and Fate picks him up, saying he needs to be taught a lesson. Fate smashes him against the trees, destroying multiple trees, and he starts begging for his life. But Fate throws him high into the air, and he equips the upgraded bow, firing a powerful arrow towards Hado and leaving a hole in the clouds. Hado falls to the ground, and he wonders why Fate didn't kill him. Fate says that he still has questions for him, and Hado thinks that this is about Roxy, so he reveals that she volunteered for the Gallia expedition herself, begging Fate to spare him as he promises to cancel the expedition. Fate explains that this isn't for Roxy, but for his own revenge, and he delivers the finishing blow. The gluttony skill activates again, giving Fate the Holy Sword technique, which is required for a person to become a Holy Knight. Greed tells Fate that he can now be considered as a Holy Knight, but he knows that no one in the capital would accept that, saying he doesn't want to be one anyway. Greed tells him that he can now unlock the second level in exchange for all of his stats. Fate agrees to do it, and Greed proceeds with the upgrade, revealing the new form, which is a scythe that can cut through anything. The next day, Roxy is about to leave for the expedition, and everyone is there to see her off. They are all sad, but Roxy consoles them, saying 3 years isn't a long time, and she makes her way to Fate, and they bid each other farewell. Haru gives Fate the recommendation letter left by Roxy so that he can seek employment at a lord's manor. But Fate rejects the letter, telling Haru that he will be living as a warrior from now on. That night, we learn that Fate actually plans to go to Gallia to support Roxy. As Fate is leaving the capital, we see a girl watching him, saying things are shaping up nicely. Sometime later, Roxy gives a speech to all the troops in the expedition, telling everyone that they must do their best to destroy the divine dragon, which has woken up from its slumber. Roxy is glad to see that a girl named Mia and a man named Mugen will be joining her. Mia calls Mugen an oddball for wanting to test his strength against a divine dragon, but Mugen explains that he volunteered because of Roxy's father and wants to avenge him. Roxy asks him if his family is against him going to Gallia, but he says that his daughter couldn't care less and only wants him to bring back Gallian relics. We see that Mugen's daughter Rain is working as a researcher in a lab filled with the goblins that Fate killed. She discovers that some of the wounds were from the magic arrows of the Black Sword, one of the weapons of mortal sin. We learn that the weapons of mortal sin are made of a special material, which can manipulate magic power at a high level, and Rain thinks that they can expand the possibility spectrum for skills, saying she wants to see one of these weapons. Fate arrives at the merchant city of Tetra, and he reveals that he's been there before. He discovers that the carriage for Galia will not be leaving till the next day, so Fate decides to gather intel for now. At the bar, he sees a man asking a group of warriors for their help, but they tell him that the money he is offering is not enough, and they start bullying him. Fate beats them up, forcing them to leave, and he greets the man, who turns out to be his old friend named Set. In a flashback, we learn that when Fate was younger, he was bullied because his stomach was always growling, and he had a good relationship with his father, before he was eventually killed by the monsters. Fate's father was a warrior with the spear technique, and this is why the village chief kept him around. After his death, no one was willing to take care of Fate, and he was driven out of the village upon the village chief's command. Back in the present, Set begs Fate to help him, but Fate doesn't seem to care, because Set is the son of the village chief. He agrees to help only because gluttony needs to be fed, and the monsters attacking the village would be perfect for him. They arrive at the village, but the village chief is disappointed, because Set brought back the once exiled weakling. Set tries to vouch for Fate's strength after having seen him defeat the other warriors, but the chief doesn't believe any of it. The villagers reveal that screams were heard from a nearby forest, thinking the monsters are getting close, and the chief suggests sacrificing Fate to buy them some time. At Set's house, Set tells Fate about his wife being killed by the monsters, and that he regrets growing up thinking that his father was always correct, explaining how he finally got his act together when his daughter was born. He informs Fate that the monsters first showed up around a month ago, and according to the eyewitnesses, the monsters can fly. The villagers have never seen anything like it before, so they decided to hire warriors to deal with them. Fate's stomach starts growling, so Set prepares to get him some food. Greed tells Fate that the monsters they are dealing with are gargoyles, who start by doing probing attacks to see how the humans react, and when the time is right, the entire pack attacks in a swarm. Set's daughter gives Fate a candy, which he eats, but he suddenly collapses. Set and his daughter wonder what just happened, and Set's daughter reveals that he just ate the candy that Grandpa had given her. Greed thinks that the candy was poisoned, and that the village chief was serious about using Fate as a sacrifice. Set tries to wake him up, but to no avail, and he realizes that the gargoyles are approaching the village. The gargoyles attack, setting the village on fire and eating the villagers. Fate is still unconscious because of the poison, so Set creates an antidote, and he gives it to Fate, allowing him to recover. He realizes that they're under attack, so he rushes outside, and he sees the village in ruins. He checks the gargoyle's stats, and we learn that it has a skill which allows it to launch fireballs. Greed transforms into a scythe as the gargoyles combine their powers, allowing them to launch a massive fireball. But Fate throws his weapon, slicing through the fireball, and it pursues the gargoyles, wiping them out. The scythe returns to Fate, and he acquires the fireball skill as the leader of the pack appears before him. He checks its stats, and we learn that it has the fireball skill as well as the ability to resist fire. Greed thinks that it will try to launch fireballs at a close range, so as the gargoyle charges at Fate, preparing to attack, he delivers a devastating blow, slicing it in half and killing it instantly. The next day, we learn that the village has been completely destroyed. Fate uses his Identify skill, revealing that the soil isn't healthy, so crops won't grow in that area. Set wonders why Fate chose to be a warrior, because he can earn a living with his Identify skill, but he tells Set that he has no choice but to fight. Set tells Fate to hit him because he feels guilty for what he did, so Fate tries to punch him lightly, but he gets knocked down as Fate realizes that he has become too strong. He tells Set to look after his daughter, and they bid each other farewell. We see Fate riding a carriage, as a man tells him to stay alert, because he is being paid to protect the carriage. A group of bandits block their path, causing the man to panic as he begs Fate to protect him. The bandits prepare to attack, but they are suddenly blown away as the mysterious girl appears, telling Fate that he owes her for the kobolds. The man allows her to ride the carriage, but as she enters it, the carriage tips over. She tells her weapon Sloth to return to normal, and this fixes the problem as Fate realizes that she can change the weight of her weapon. While in the carriage, the girl reveals that she knows about Fate's skill because she isn't so different, revealing that she also has a skill of deadly sin. She introduces herself as Mine of Wrath, and her stomach starts growling, so he gives her food, but she eats all of it, leaving nothing for him to eat. They arrive at the town of Lanchester, where we see a girl entering the gate, but she is greeted by ghosts, so she screams for help. A man named Rudolph arrives, defeating the ghosts and introducing himself as the Lord of Lanchester, grabbing the girl's attention. Fate learns that the expedition led by Roxy will be arriving in the town, and he is about to be paid for his services, but Mine takes it, saying she defeated the bandits. She suddenly falls asleep, so Fate carries her around the town as he notices that everyone has symbols on their necks. Greed thinks that the symbols represent the social classes, thinking the people must really love Rudolph because they allowed him to place symbols on their necks. But we see him executing his men because they have failed in their duty to convey his family's greatness, and we learn that the people are obeying him because they don't want to die by his hands. Fate arrives at a hotel, where Greed reveals that he knows Mine, and that sloth is also a weapon of mortal sin. He reveals that the skills of deadly sin were born by defying the divine laws, and that gluttony has the potential to overturn the divine system of leveling because of its ability to consume souls. Fate notes that he can't satiate his hunger, seeing it as punishment for consuming souls, and he wonders why he was given the skill of gluttony, revealing that he hates it because he has to keep killing just to survive. Greed warns him not to let his emotions disturb him because gluttony could take over if his mind is weak, revealing that the trick to controlling his hunger is to sustain a state of near starvation. While going on a hunt, Greed advises Fate not to satisfy gluttony at once and slowly get his fill. A Sandman appears, so Fate uses his bow, and he casts Fireball on the arrow, before launching it at the Sandman, killing it instantly. Meanwhile, Mine wakes up, and she grabs something to eat. She learns about a creature known as the Sand Golem, which is threatening the people in the town, and it has a bounty of 100 gold. Fate continues to hunt Sandman, and he feels the presence of a powerful monster, realizing that it's time for the main dish. We see a group of warriors struggling against the Sand Golem when Fate joins the battle, saying he will take care of the monster. He checks the monster's stats, and we learn that it has the ability to create sandstorms. He launches a fire arrow, and he charges in, but the monster manages to push him back. It uses its skill, creating a sandstorm, but Fate transforms his weapon into a scythe, using it to launch an attack, which overpowers the sandstorm, destroying the monster's body. The monster's core tries to escape, hiding in the sand, but Fate uses his bow, launching a powerful arrow, which chases the core, destroying it in an enormous explosion. The next day, Fate receives 100 gold for defeating the Sand Golem, but Rudolph suddenly appears, telling Fate to serve him, as he explains that Fate has no right to refuse, because his decision is final. Mine tells him that Fate belongs to her, but he calls her a child, so she hits him, blowing him away. Fate knows that they're in trouble, so he tells Mine that they should leave the town. They ride the carriage, as Fate wonders why Mine eats a lot, and she reveals that anger burns plenty of calories. He tells her that despite her appetite, she isn't growing at all, causing her to become upset, so she activates Sloth, but she ends up breaking the carriage. As the owner fixes it, Fate enters a village, and Greed notes that there are plenty of monsters in the area, so he thinks that someone is protecting the village. He encounters the village chief named Aaron, who is revealed to be a holy knight. He knows that Fate wants to stay in the village, and he challenges Fate to a duel. Fate tries to check his stats, but he recognizes the Identify skill, revealing that he can also use that skill. They exchange blows, and Aaron manages to defeat Fate, but he decides to let him stay, under the condition that they train together. He knows that Fate isn't used to his powers, so he will benefit from their training. He ends up accepting the condition, and Mine appears, grabbing Aaron's attention, because he can already tell that she's a skilled warrior. He allows them to stay in the village, and we see him with Fate, training him how to fight hand-to-hand. He struggles to hit Aaron, but he enters half-starvation mode, improving his speed, and allowing him to keep up with Aaron's moves. That evening, we see Aaron staring at a nearby castle, as Fate sees a photo of Aaron's family. Greed thinks that Aaron's son looks like Fate, thinking his family has something to do with why he became the village chief. The next day, Aaron tells Fate to protect himself with a twig, and Aaron charges at him. But he predicts the sword's movement, and he lets the twig slide along the blade, allowing him to deflect the blow. Aaron is impressed, saying Fate has improved, And that evening, Fate tells Eren that they will be leaving the next day, thanking him for his hospitality. He observes that Mine is too busy eating, and she reveals that she can't taste her food, as Greed mentions that this is the punishment for wrath. Eren stares at the castle, and he reveals that it once belonged to him. We learn that while he was away from the castle, it was attacked by monsters, so his son Rook tried his best to defend, but he ended up dying. The Lich Lord took over the castle, and Eren knows that his family is still trapped there. Fate thinks about going there, and Eren decides to join him, while Mine agrees to protect the village if they pay her 50 gold. They make their way to the castle, where Fate shoots a skeleton, turning it into stone, as he reveals that he used Sandstorm with his arrow to petrify the target. They head deeper into the castle, destroying the skeletons along the way, and they enter a room, where Eren is surprised to see his family. They tell him that they've been waiting for him, and he thinks that they're still alive. But Greed reveals that they're already dead, and the Lich is using illusion magic to make them look alive. Rook suddenly attacks Eren, but he manages to block it, pushing Rook back. Rook says that he despises Eren because he abandoned his family to work in the capital, and Rook blames him for what happened to them. Fate thinks about using his scythe to dispel the illusion, but Greed reveals that if they do this, Fate will end up consuming the souls of Eren's family, sending them to an eternal hell. Eren says that he will take care of his family, and Fate decides to look for the Lich. He eventually finds it, realizing that its stats are ridiculously high. He manages to break its arms, but it summons a group of zombies, who are begging Fate to save them, but he knows that he can't attack them. Eren joins the fight, taking down the zombies, and he sees his wife, recalling the last moment he spent with his family. We learn that they didn't want him to go, but he promised to return after his mission. He blames himself for what happened to them, because they wouldn't have died if he had returned sooner. But he is determined to put their souls to rest, and he uses the Grand Cross skill, releasing a flash of holy light, but it isn't strong enough to defeat the Lich. Fate sees Rook's sword, and he decides to use it, combining his powers with Eren. They use the Grand Cross skill, creating a massive flash of light, which instantly kills the Lich, freeing the souls in the castle. Eren's family appears before him, and they tell him not to blame himself for what happened, telling him that he was able to save them in the end. He asks for forgiveness, saying they are more important than his duties, but they tell him that he should continue to serve the people. He promises to make them proud, and he gives Rook a souvenir, before they finally rest in peace. The souls in the castle disappear, but the Lich's core tries to ruin the moment, so Fate destroys it, allowing him to consume the Lich. Later that evening, we learn that Eren has broken his level limit, thinking it's because he was fighting with Fate. Greed reveals that Eren was able to do this because he opened his heart to Fate, who has a skill of deadly sin. They return to the village, where Eren pays Mine for her services. She mentions that she needs money to rebuild her village, saying money doesn't lie, and Fate will understand what she means after he grows older. Eren reveals that he saw her 50 years ago, and that she was already a perfect warrior, but her appearance hasn't changed at all. She tells him that he might be able to reach her level after he trains for 1,000 years, but she knows that he won't be able to live that long, because he's only human, saying she is a ghost who isn't allowed to die. Eren observes that Fate's eyes have returned to normal, and he mentions that he needs to keep killing monsters, so that his eyes won't turn red. Eren seems to know about gluttony, telling him to return to the village after his quest, because there is something he needs to know. Meanwhile, the Vlerick family acquires an artifact known as the Philosopher's Stone, which has the power to cure anything, and Raphael's sister thinks that they are closer to achieving immortality. A servant delivers a report, telling them that Hado was killed by Corpse. The servant mentions that Corpse isn't a monster, but a warrior, and Raphael wonders who he is, wanting to avenge his fallen brother. But that's where this video ends. Remember to like and subscribe to the channel. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.